Before Disneyland, before theme parks were even a recognized industry, California was already full of bizarre, ambitious, and occasionally completely insane roadside attractions. Some of them rivaled the parks we still know today. Almost all of them are gone, and most people driving past the spots where they stood have no idea anything was ever there. This is the forgotten attractions of old California. Pacific Ocean Park. Pacific Ocean Park, known to regulars as POP, opened on July 28, 1958, straddling the boundary between Santa Monica and Venice. It was built as a direct response to Disneyland, which had opened 3 years earlier in Anaheim and immediately demonstrated that there was enormous money in family entertainment built around a unified theme. CBS and the Santa Anita Racetrack Company partnered on the project, putting up the kind of money that only a television network and a racetrack operator could comfortably afford. And the partnership itself reflects how quickly mainstream American business recognized the financial potential Walt Disney had just proven. The park covered roughly 28 acres on and around a pier extending into the Pacific, and the ocean setting gave it something Disneyland could never have: the literal ocean as a backdrop. The entrance featured towering plastic seahorses framing a structure called Neptune's Courtyard, and the overall aesthetic leaned hard into an undersea, futuristic theme that fit the era's fascination with the deep ocean as a kind of alien frontier, not unlike outer space. That dual fascination, with the ocean depths and with space exploration, defined a lot of late 1950s design language, and POP leaned into both simultaneously wherever it could. Attractions included a mirror maze, a fun house, a carousel, and a ride called Flight to Mars that put guests through a simulated rocket journey, tapping directly into the same space-age enthusiasm that was driving American popular culture during the early years of the Cold War space race. There was also something called the Westinghouse Enchanted Forest, a walkthrough experience sponsored by the appliance company, which tells you something about how thoroughly corporate sponsorship had already infiltrated the amusement industry by the late 1950s, decades before Epcot made corporate-sponsored pavilions a household concept. POP also became a regular filming location. Several episodes of the original Twilight Zone used the park's pier and structures, and its slightly eerie oceanic atmosphere worked well for a show that specialized in unsettling the familiar. Other television productions of the era found similar value in the park's distinctive, slightly otherworldly visual identity. But the park's location worked against it almost from the start. Santa Monica and Venice were going through significant urban decline during this period, and the surrounding neighborhoods became less appealing to families as years passed. An urban renewal project intended to improve the area instead made getting to the park more difficult, cutting off some of the access roads guests had relied on. Attendance declined steadily through the mid-1960s, and the park's operators struggled to find capital for renovations that might have kept the experience feeling current against a rapidly evolving amusement industry that Disneyland itself was continually reshaping. Pacific Ocean Park closed on October 6, 1967, just shy of a decade after opening. The structure sat for years afterward, slowly deteriorating, occasionally catching fire, and becoming a hangout for surfers, who used the abandoned pier pilings as a launch point. Fires throughout the 1970s eventually destroyed most of what remained. Today, there's essentially nothing visible. Some pier pilings beneath the water near the Santa Monica-Venice border, and parking lots where Neptune's Courtyard once stood. A man who grew up nearby and later wrote about the park's history described the experience of returning to the site decades later as walking through a place that had completely erased its own history, leaving nothing behind except the memory held by people who happened to be there in the 1960s. Busch Gardens, Pasadena. Most people associate Busch Gardens with Tampa or Williamsburg, the two parks that still operate under that name today. Far fewer know that Anheuser-Busch operated a third Busch Gardens in Pasadena, California, from 1906 until 1937, and a separate facility in Van Nuys from 1966 to 1979. The original Pasadena location began as a private estate garden built by Adolphus Busch, one of the founders of the Anheuser-Busch Brewing Company, who maintained a winter residence in Pasadena. The gardens were elaborately landscaped with exotic plants, sculptures, and ornamental features. and Busch eventually opened them to the public free of charge as a kind of civic gift. The gardens became one of Pasadena's most popular attractions during the early 20th century, drawing visitors who wanted to see the kind of horticultural extravagance that few private citizens could otherwise produce. The site closed in 1937 after Busch family ownership of the property changed, and much of the original gardens were eventually built over, though traces of pathways and stonework reportedly remain tucked into a residential area along Madeline Drive in San Marino. The Van Nuys location was a different operation entirely, built decades later beside an active Anheuser-Busch brewery as a promotional facility. From 1966 to 1979, visitors could tour the brewing operation and then walk through a 17-acre tropical garden featuring exotic birds, boat rides through lagoons, and cascading waterfalls, an unusually lush environment for the San Fernando Valley. It was free to the public, functioning essentially as marketing for the beer, and it worked. Families who had no particular interest in brewing came anyway, just for the gardens and the bird shows. The Van Nuys Busch Gardens closed in 1979, and unlike many other entries on this list, almost nothing physical remains. The monorail used to move guests through the gardens was dismantled, the lagoons were filled in, and the birds were relocated. The brewery itself continued operating for years afterward, and free tours of the brewery, without the gardens, are still occasionally available at the same Roscoe Boulevard address. Jungleland USA. Jungleland operated in Thousand Oaks from 1926 to 1969, and for much of that run it functioned less like a conventional tourist attraction and more like an industrial facility for the entertainment business, specifically an animal supplier and training ground for Hollywood. The park housed lions, elephants, chimpanzees, and a wide range of other animals that were regularly rented out or directly used in film and television productions. At its peak, the facility was supplying trained animals to a substantial share of Hollywood productions that required them, making it as much a working studio backlot as a public attraction. Visitors could tour the grounds, watch performances, and see animals up close in ways that modern zoo standards would never permit today. Jungleland also functioned as something of an informal celebrity hangout, given its constant connection to film and television production. Animal trainers who worked there over the decades went on to become recognizable figures in their own right within the industry, training animals that appeared in dozens of major productions spanning everything from Tarzan films to network television series. The park's decline tracked closely with the growth of competing attractions throughout Southern California, particularly after Disneyland's 1955 opening shifted family entertainment spending dramatically. Jungleland also faced increasing scrutiny over animal welfare standards that, even by the looser regulatory environment of the era, were starting to look outdated as public attitudes toward animal captivity began shifting in the 1960s. Financial troubles mounted through the decade as the costs of maintaining a large exotic animal collection outpaced what ticket sales and production rentals could sustain. The park closed in 1969, and the animals were dispersed to other facilities, sold, or in some cases simply relocated to roadside zoos that themselves wouldn't survive much longer in an industry that was rapidly consolidating around larger, better-funded operations. The 170-acre site eventually became the location of the Thousand Oaks Civic Arts Plaza, leaving essentially no physical trace of the menagerie that had operated there for over 4 decades. Japanese Village and Deer Park. Opened in 1967 in Buena Park, directly across the street from the much larger and more successful Knott's Berry Farm, the Japanese Village and Deer Park offered visitors a curated experience of Japanese culture combined with an unusual feature: free-roaming deer that guests could feed and pet throughout the grounds. The park included traditional Japanese-style architecture, koi ponds, dolphin and seal shows, and a collection of Japanese cultural performances. It was, by most accounts, a sincere if somewhat commercialized attempt to introduce Southern California visitors to elements of Japanese aesthetics and tradition at a time when that kind of cultural exposure for the average American family was relatively rare. The deer themselves became the park's signature feature, and its eventual undoing in a roundabout way. Free-roaming animals in close contact with large numbers of visitors created ongoing management challenges, and as attendance fluctuated through the 1970s, maintaining the park's various attractions, the animal shows, the gardens, the deer population, became financially difficult. Competition from larger, better capitalized parks nearby didn't help. The Japanese Village and Deer Park closed in 1975, and the Buena Park location was eventually redeveloped for other commercial use. Lion Country Safari and Jungle Gardens. Before drive-through safari parks became a recognizable format across the country, several Southern California operators tried variations on the concept throughout the late 1960s and 1970s. One lesser-known example, Jungle Gardens, opened on the grounds of the Japanese Village and Deer Park, and was spearheaded by celebrity animal trainer Ralph Helfer, who had built a career training animals for film and television. The star attraction was a chimpanzee named Jerry, marketed at the time as the world's most human chimp. Jerry reportedly dined at a table with the Dutton family who managed him, brushed his own teeth as part of his act, and performed a range of human-mimicking behaviors that delighted visitors and would almost certainly draw very different scrutiny from animal welfare advocates today. The park's appeal rested heavily on this kind of novelty performance rather than on rides or large-scale attractions, and it closed in the mid-1970s as the broader Buena Park Animal Attraction Cluster declined. Separately, actual drive-through safari parks did take hold in California during this period, most notably the original Lion Country Safari concept, which had multiple locations around the country, including one in Irvine, opening in 1970. Guests drove their own cars through enclosures housing lions, giraffes, and other animals, an idea that sounds almost recklessly casual by today's standards, but reflected the era's more relaxed approach to animal containment and public safety. The Irvine location eventually transitioned into what became the Wild Rivers Water Park, and later other commercial development, with the original safari concept fading out as liability concerns and changing land values made the format harder to sustain. Santa's Village. Long before Christmas-themed attractions became a recognizable seasonal niche, Santa's Village opened in the San Bernardino Mountains in 1955, the same year as Disneyland, offering a year-round Christmas experience regardless of the actual calendar date. Children could meet Santa Claus in July, ride reindeer-themed attractions, and walk through a candy cane forest while temperatures outside had nothing to do with winter. The park was part of a small chain of similarly themed Santa's Village locations that popped up in a few states during the same era, an early example of a franchised amusement concept built around a single holiday motif stretched across an entire calendar year. The alpine setting of the San Bernardino Mountains gave the California location a genuinely fitting backdrop. Pine trees and cool mountain air made the year-round Christmas conceit feel less absurd than it might have at a beach location. Santa's Village ran successfully for decades, but changing entertainment trends and aging infrastructure eventually caught up with it. The original park closed in 1998, and the property sat abandoned for years, with buildings slowly falling into disrepair in the way mountain structures do when nobody is maintaining them against the elements. For a long stretch, it seemed destined to join the broader category of California attractions reduced to overgrown ruins and faded signage. Then, somewhat unusually for this list, it came back. New owners purchased and restored the property, reopening it in 2016 as Sky Park at Santa's Village, retaining the holiday branding while modernizing the infrastructure. It remains one of the rare entries in California's catalog of lost attractions that found its way back from abandonment rather than staying there. Lincoln Park Alligator Farm. Before the Japanese Village and Deer Park had its run in Buena Park, the same city hosted a far stranger neighbor across the street from Knott's Berry Farm, an alligator farm that had relocated there in 1953 from its original home in Lincoln Heights, near Los Angeles. The farm housed roughly 1,000 alligators, along with various other reptiles, and visitors could walk through the grounds observing the animals in pits and enclosures that, again, would not meet contemporary standards for either animal welfare or visitor safety. The attraction operated for roughly 3 decades in Buena Park, drawing curiosity seekers who wanted to see alligators up close in a state not exactly known for its native alligator population. The farm eventually closed, and the surviving alligators were relocated to facilities in Florida, where the climate and existing alligator population made for a more natural retirement than continuing to operate a roadside reptile farm in suburban Orange County. Nothing of the original site remains recognizable today. Irvine's African Safari Experiment. In 1970, the Irvine Company, the massive land development firm that had shaped much of Orange County, decided to bring a slice of African safari tourism to Southern California, well before drive-through animal parks were common anywhere outside of a handful of pioneering locations. Visitors drove their own vehicles through enclosures containing zebras, giraffes, and other African wildlife, an idea that captured the public imagination at a time when international travel to actually see these animals in their native habitats was financially out of reach for most American families. The experiment ran for several years before financial and logistical pressures made it difficult to sustain, particularly as concerns around animal welfare and the practical challenges of maintaining large exotic species in a climate and ecosystem entirely foreign to them became harder to ignore. The land eventually transitioned to other uses, as Irvine's broader master plan development continued to expand across the region throughout the 1970s and 1980s, swallowing up the open acreage that the safari concept had originally required. Pony Express Ranch and the Buffalo Days of Newport. Decades before the luxury homes and yacht harbors that define Newport Beach today, building contractor Gene Clark leased 115 acres from the Irvine Company in the rolling hills above Newport Harbor and opened a family-oriented ranch attraction featuring something almost nobody expected to find in coastal Orange County, a herd of 72 buffalo shipped in from Clark's own ranch in Kansas. The attraction, which operated through the 1950s, offered teepees, a small train ride, mule and pony rides, a trading post, and a petting zoo. Visitors could also eat burgers made from the buffalo roaming the grounds, an arrangement that probably wouldn't survive a single modern marketing meeting, but fit comfortably within the era's more casual relationship between live animal attractions and the menu items served a few hundred feet away. The ranch closed in 1959 as Newport Beach's land values climbed and the post-war development boom made holding on to 115 acres of buffalo pasture an increasingly difficult business case to justify. In 1961, the barn and silo structures were converted into office space for William Pereira, the master planner responsible for shaping much of Irvine's subsequent development. The buffalo, like so much else on this list, simply disappeared from the landscape as the region around them transformed into something else entirely. Marineland of the Pacific. Marineland of the Pacific opened in 1954 on the Palos Verdes Peninsula, predating even Disneyland and establishing itself as one of the earliest major marine mammal attractions on the West Coast, years before SeaWorld existed in any form. The park featured killer whales, dolphins, sea lions, and a range of other marine life, drawing visitors who wanted to see ocean animals performing tricks in a setting that combined entertainment with what was marketed at the time as genuine scientific and educational value. The cliffside location offered sweeping ocean views that few other West Coast attractions could match, and the natural setting became as much a draw as the animals themselves. For decades, Marineland operated as one of the region's signature attractions, drawing comparisons to Disneyland in terms of regional prestige, even though the scale and format were entirely different. The park's killer whale, an orca named Corky, became one of its most famous residents, and a recognizable local celebrity in her own right throughout the 1960s and 1970s, performing daily shows that drew families from across Southern California specifically to see her. Corky's longevity at the park and the genuine affection many longtime visitors developed for her made her departure all the more significant when it eventually came. The park's fortunes changed dramatically when SeaWorld, based in San Diego and backed by significantly larger corporate resources, purchased Marineland in the late 1980s. SeaWorld's decision was not to expand or maintain the Palos Verdes location, but to close it and relocate its most valuable animals, including Corky, down to the San Diego park. The move was controversial even at the time, with longtime Marineland staff and visitors expressing frustration that a competitor essentially bought the park in order to shut it down and absorb its assets rather than continue operating it. Marineland of the Pacific shut down abruptly, its structures left standing for a period before eventual demolition made way for luxury residential development on the bluffs above the ocean. Today, concrete foundations and old plumbing occasionally surface from the clifftop soil after heavy rains, a strange and largely unnoticed reminder of what used to draw crowds to that stretch of coastline. Frontier Village. San Jose's Frontier Village operated from 1961 to 1980, built around an Old West theme that fit comfortably within the broader mid-century fascination with frontier nostalgia that also powered Knott's Berry Farm and Disneyland's own Frontierland. The park featured a mining town, stagecoach rides, can-can shows, and a log flume ride, all wrapped in a Western aesthetic that was, by the standards of the time, fairly standard amusement park fare. There was also a recreated jail, gunfight reenactment staged for visiting families, and a small petting zoo that rounded out the Western theming with a slightly more family-friendly touch. The park had originally been planned for a Sunnyvale location along El Camino Real before the project shifted to San Jose, a relocation that reportedly came after negotiations over the original site fell through. Its eventual decline came from a combination of factors that will sound familiar by now. Increasing competition once Great America opened nearby in 1976, with significantly larger investment and more modern attractions, lawsuits from neighbors who complained about noise from the park, and the broader financial pressure of trying to expand under restrictive conditions imposed by the San Jose City Council, which tied any expansion to funding traffic improvements the park couldn't easily afford on its own. Frontier Village closed in 1980, and the site was redeveloped into housing and commercial space, leaving behind only the memories of a generation of South Bay families who'd spent summer days there. Some longtime San Jose residents still describe Frontier Village with the kind of specific nostalgic detail, particular ride sounds, particular smells from the food stands, that suggests the park occupied a genuinely formative place in a lot of childhoods throughout the region, even decades after the bulldozers came through. Playland at the beach. Playland at the beach straddled San Francisco's Ocean Beach from 1913 until 1972, though its earliest attraction, a wooden roller coaster called the Gravity Railroad, dated back to 1884, making it one of the longest continuously evolving amusement sites in California history. Over its decades of operation, Playland accumulated a sprawling collection of attractions: bumper cars, a Ferris wheel, a shoot-the-chute water ride, a carousel, and a giant pinhole camera structure called the Camera Obscura. The park's signature feature was its fun house, which included a collection of animatronic figures, the most famous being a mechanical laughing woman known as Laughing Sal, whose booming, slightly unsettling recorded laughter became one of the most recognizable sounds associated with the park. The funhouse design was apparently distinctive enough that it was directly replicated inside the Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk's own funhouse until a 1983 remodel changed that interior. Playland closed in 1972 as the surrounding neighborhood changed and the park's aging infrastructure became increasingly costly to maintain against San Francisco's notoriously corrosive coastal climate. Unlike many entries on this list though, fragments of Playland survive in recognizable form elsewhere in the Bay Area. Laughing Sal herself was preserved and now resides at the Musée Mécanique on Fisherman's Wharf, where visitors can still hear that same laugh. The Camera Obscura still stands next to the Cliff House building near the original site, and the carousel was relocated to Yerba Buena Gardens in San Francisco's South of Market neighborhood, where it continues operating today, a rare case of an attraction's individual pieces outliving the park itself by half a century and counting. What's left? Most of what's on this list exists now only in photographs, newspaper archives, and the memories of people old enough to have actually visited. A handful of physical traces survive: a carousel relocated to a city park, an animatronic figure preserved in a museum, scattered foundation work surfacing after a heavy rain. The rest has been paved over, built up, or simply left to decay quietly in places few people think to look, hiding in plain sight behind shopping centers and residential streets that gave no indication of what used to occupy the same ground. California's relationship with these attractions has always been somewhat disposable. The state that essentially invented the modern theme park industry through Disneyland has also been remarkably efficient at discarding the smaller, stranger, more idiosyncratic attractions that came before and around it. Whether that's a function of land values, changing tastes, or the simple economics of an industry that rewards scale over novelty, is something that's been debated by historians and amusement park enthusiasts who track this kind of thing far more closely than the general public ever does. Land in coastal and urban California has simply become too valuable, in most cases, to justify the kind of low-density, single-purpose attractions that flourished when the state still had room to spare. What remains consistent is the public's appetite for revisiting these places, at least in memory. Local historical societies, amateur photographers, and urban exploration communities continue to document and discuss sites long after the last structure has come down. There's a recurring sentiment among people who grew up visiting these parks, a sense that something genuinely strange and specific to a particular moment in California's development existed and then quietly vanished, leaving behind little more than a parking lot, a plaque, or nothing at all. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more fascinating stories.